February 23rd, 1944. 25,000 feet above frozen, occupied Germany. Outside temperature, number 40 left. Inside the cockpit of the B-17 Flying Fortress Yankee Doodle, the metal vibrated like a giant monster breathing beneath the crew's boots. Lieutenant John Morgan, a 2-3-year-old farm boy from Ohio, wiped the frost from his oxygen mask and leaned closer to the glass. The horizon was a sheet of steel. The sun was weak. The sky looked angry. But below that cold sky, 300 American bombers were flying in tight formation, moving like a single metallic swarm toward the deepest, most heavily defended heart of Nazi Germany. John checked his instruments again. Fuel pressure, stable. Engine temperatures, critical but holding. Altitude, 24,980 feet. Their target, the Messerschmitt aircraft factory that was supplying fighters used against Allied bombers. Inside, the crew was trying to stay warm. But no amount of heavy leather jackets or wool gloves could stop the cold from crawling into their bones. "How we looking, Lieutenant?" asked Sergeant Frank Dawson, the top turret gunner. John didn't look back. "Cold, scared, but still flying," he said with a half smile. Frank chuckled nervously. Just another day in paradise. The plane shook violently as they hit a pocket of turbulence. The crew grabbed whatever they could to keep steady. The sound of 12 massive engines from surrounding B-17 seconds thundered in their ears. It wasn't just noise. It was a feeling like being inside a giant drum. This mission wasn't supposed to be easy. None of them were. But today had a different weight. A different fear, a different silence. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. John Morgan was not supposed to be a soldier. He was supposed to be a farmer, a husband, a father, maybe. He grew up milking cows, fixing fences, and plowing fields before sunrise. He had only flown a plane for the first time at 19. But he had a gift, a natural connection with machines. He flew as if he could feel the wind without seeing it. When the war began, he didn't join for glory. He joined to protect home, to protect his mother, to protect the idea of a world that could have peace. His father had served in the Great War and warned him about the cost of battle. But John had looked north toward Europe and saw something dark rising, something he couldn't ignore. And so, the farm boy became a pilot. The pilot became a leader, and the leader found himself at 25,000 feet, breathing frozen oxygen, ready to face the deadliest swarm of German fighters ever assembled. He looked at the photograph tucked in the cockpit frame. His mother, smiling, holding their farm dog. He tapped the photo twice, a ritual he had never missed. "All right, Yankee Doodle," he whispered. "Let's get our boys home." A bomber wasn't just a machine. It was a family of 10 men trapped inside a steel shell. Each one had a job. Each one depended on the other. Captain Miller, the original commander, sat beside John.com, experienced, with eyes that had seen too many explosions in the sky. Sergeant Dawson, the top turret gunner, was the joker. Always laughing, always talking. Nervous men make yokes. Brave men understand why. Tommy Briggs, the tail gunner, was only 19, a kid from Brooklyn with a baseball glove, always stuffed in his jacket pocket. Eddie Collins, ball turret gunner, the smallest, quietest of them all, curled in a metal ball beneath the belly of the plane, trapped in the loneliest position any crewman could have. Jake Turner, waist gunner strong, stubborn, always chewing gum, even though gum froze at altitude. And Harold Stein, the radio operator carrying letters, fears, and hopes, connecting them with the world they left behind. These men didn't start as heroes. War made them so. The fighters came slowly, at first tiny black dots in the distance. But then the dots grew, combined, multiplied. "Bandits at 10 o'clock, someone yelled on the radio. Messerschmitt BF 109 seconds and Focke-Wulf 190 seconds. The deadliest fighters in Europe dove like hawks toward the formation. John gripped the controls. Frank swung the turret. Tommy in the tail started breathing faster. The first cannon fires streaked past like glowing needles. "Steady!" Captain Miller shouted. Then the skies exploded. German fighters came from every direction above, below, left, right. The air shook with machine gun fire. Tracer rounds zipped like fireflies through the freezing air. The bomber formation responded like muscle memory tightening, layering their defensive fire, covering each other. Yankee Doodle vibrated as Dawson fired bursts into an enemy fighter climbing toward them. "Come on! Come on! Drop!" Frank yelled as the German plane burst into smoke and spiraled downward. But for every enemy downed, 5 more replaced it. The Germans were fighting to protect the factory. The Americans were fighting to destroy it. No one planned on going home without giving everything. At 26 minutes into the battle, it happened. A Focke-Wulf 190 swooped under them, fired a burst upward, and the cockpit exploded in glass. Captain Miller screamed. Blood sprayed across the controls. John felt the plane tilt sharply, the right side dropping fast. "Miller's hit!" John shouted. He grabbed the yoke with both hands and fought the dive. The engines roared in protest. The altimeter spun downward. "Hold her, John! Hold her!" Dawson screamed from above. John pulled with every ounce of strength. The blood on the cockpit windows froze instantly. Miller slumped over, unconscious or dead. John couldn't tell. He pushed the captain's body aside with one arm while pulling the controls with the other. He had trained for emergencies. But nothing prepares you for flying a crippled bomber under fire while your commander bleeds beside you. The bomber finally leveled, barely, but they were no longer in formation. They were alone, and alone meant death. John knew the rule. A lone bomber is a dead bomber. He looked back. Miller was alive, but barely. Bleeding heavily, unable to speak. John had two choices. Turn back toward England and try to save his crew, or fly straight into the target, alone, under the full weight of German defenses. So the mission didn't fail. A moment of silence filled the cockpit, just John's breath echoing inside his mask. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to do the right thing. He thought of his mother, of the world he wanted after the war, a world where fear didn't rule nations. He looked forward. The target was straight ahead. "We finished the mission, boys," John said quietly. "We finish it for everyone who won't make it home." The crew didn't argue. They knew the cost. They also knew the purpose. As Yankee Doodle approached the aircraft factory, the sky turned into hell. Flak guns opened fire from the ground, massive shells bursting around them like black, poisonous flowers. The explosions shook the bomber violently. Shrapnel ripped through the left wing. Fuel sprayed like mist. Inside the ball turret, Eddie shouted, "We're getting torn apart." John held the controls with white knuckles, teeth clenched. Every explosion pushed them off course. Every correction burned what little strength he had left. Frank fired non-stop at incoming fighters. Jake in the waist gun fired until his barrel glowed. The bomber was bleeding. The crew was exhausted. Yet the target was only seconds away. "Bomb bay doors open," Harold called. John steadied the plane. The ground rose beneath them like a dark mountain. Drop in 3, 2, 1. The bombs released. A heavy silence followed. Then, a column of fire erupted below. The factory disappeared under a cloud of smoke and flame. Mission accomplished. But they still had to get home. Yankee Doodle turned west, wounded, slow, shaking. They were far behind the formation now. Easy prey? 5 minutes after turning back, 2 German fighters spotted them. Tommy in the tail shouted, "They're circling us, I don't have a clean shot." The fighters dove. Bullets ripped through the fuselage. Glass shattered. Fabric and metal exploded into fragments. Eddie in the ball turret screamed, "They're coming back around." John pushed the throttle, but one engine coughed and died. They couldn't outrun anyone. Frank fired upward. Gunfire lit the sky. Tracer rounds streaked like comets. Jake hit a fighter's wing. It spiraled downward, but the second fighter lined up perfectly behind the tail. "John, dive!" Frank yelled. John jerked the plane downward as tracers passed inches from Tommy's turret. But the enemy kept coming. Yankee Doodle was almost out of tricks. The German fighter approached for the kill shot. Tommy sighted him. The world slowed. Tommy whispered, "Not today." He fired a single, perfect burst. The bullets hit the cockpit of the German fighter. The enemy pilot slumped. The plane broke apart in midair. Silence. Only the sound of dying engines and wind filled the bomber. Tommy exhaled shakily. "I thought that was it." Frank replied softly, "Me too, kid." The rest of the journey was a painful crawl through frozen clouds. Miller regained consciousness briefly, whispering, good job," before slipping out again. Eddie prayed quietly in the cold metal ball. Harold tapped the radio, sending distress calls into the void. With only 3 engines functioning, the bomber lost altitude. John fought to keep her in the air. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. But finally, through a break in the clouds, they saw it. The English coastline? Harold cried tears that froze on his cheeks. Jake kissed his lucky dog tag. Even stoic Frank laughed. John just stared. Exhausted, shaking, but smiling. As they approached the airfield, one more problem appeared. The landing gear wouldn't deploy. John tried again. Nothing. They were too heavy, too damaged. "Belly landing," Frank said. "God help us." John lowered the flaps. He aligned the crippled bomber with the runway, breathing slow, steady. "Hold on," he whispered. The bomber hit the ground hard. Metal screamed. Sparks exploded under the fuselage. The plane slid nearly half a mile before stopping. Smoke filled the cockpit. Silence followed. Then the crew began climbing out, limping, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Medics rushed to pull Captain Miller out. John collapsed to his knees on the grass. He looked at the sky. They had made it. The strike on the factory crippled German fighter production for months. Command credited Yankee Doodle's sacrifice for keeping hundreds of Allied bombers safe. John Morgan received the Medal of Honor. He didn't want it. He said the real heroes were the men who didn't return. But he accepted it anyway. Not for himself, but for his crew and for every soul who fought in those icy skies. Years later, John returned to his family farm. He grew old. He married. He raised children. He never bragged. He never told war stories to impress. But sometimes, quietly, he would sit on his porch at sunset, look at the sky, and wonder, how did a farm boy survive the fires of heaven? He knew the answer. Because 10 boys and a fragile metal bird chose courage over fear, duty over death, hope over despair. This is their story. A story of frost and fire, of unbreakable brotherhood, of a bomber that should have died, but didn't. A story of Yankee Doodle, the flying fortress that refused to fall,